So, in a very statue-heavy episode of the show, um, I did want to talk a little bit about the statue. I really did. Not the. I talked about the Jesus statue earlier, the white Jesus statue. I did want to talk about um, the Confederate statues because this one, I I kind of fall in line with my biases, if you will. I do think that we should take down a lot of Confederate statues, but I'm coming from somebody who recognizes a few things. Number one, the Confederacy as a whole was 5 years. I think the South has much deeper traditions and a much richer culture than the Confederacy. The Confederacy was never really celebrated until Jim Crow and desegregation was pushed. And a lot of these statues also went up in that time as a way to remind certain people that they're still being watched. You see, you're not on our land. You're not on your land, you're on our land. A lot of messages were made. But regardless, I hear the argument. You're trying to destroy American history. They want to erase American history. Um, if we don't have this history, we're doomed to repeat it, right? If we forget about this history. Let me just say a couple things on that note, real quick. If you need a statue to remind you not to enslave people, maybe this whole experiment really is a fail. Um, and honestly, I would love to be in a world where we could forget slavery existed. So, though, think about those two before you're worried that we might fall into the trap of slavery again. But no, I think to an extent, if it were me, I think, yeah, you take down the statues, but you don't destroy them. I think you put them in a museum because I do think that's important to see where we were at a point, what we thought was worth, idolizing. Um, it could be very educational and informative in the future, and I do think you get to a certain point. Like, I think there should be Nazi museums and stuff like that. I'm not for Nazism, but I do think that you look at that and it's interesting. If nonetheless, it's interesting, if not a little bit educational, and helps you philosophize on just the state of where we came from, back when we were amoebas to the point that we're at now. You can kind of trace how culture and evolution has occurred. But for all the people who are worried that, well, we don't want to forget about slavery, we don't want to forget about the South, um, I got a proposal. Take down the slavers, those statues, let's get rid of them, and bring in statues of, like, Harriet Tubman, or another person who I think would be great would be Thomas Garrett. Thomas Garrett, if you say, well, yeah, but you want to do Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, what about white people? Here we go. Thomas Garrett's a perfect white person who would be great to have a statue of. If you don't know about Thomas Garrett, quick, brief explanation of who he was. He was one of the most influential people and one of the most I don't know, earliest allies and people who ran the Underground Railroad. He was very, very huge in it. But what he did before then was he was an iron merchant, and he came into quite a great wealth. When he learned about the slavery and he learned about the Underground Railroad, he invested so much of his time and his money that he eventually was caught and fined so many times that they fined him of all of his wealth. And he did that all in lieu to help black people escape slavery. That's a perfect guy who should have a statue, and I'm sure he does. But we can take down the Robert E. Lee statue, replace it with Thomas Garrett. I mean, because if we're worried about losing our culture, we're worried about losing our history. Well, this guy's perfect example of history that we should worship, as well as you know, Harriet Tubman and people of that, that nature, even to an extent, Ulysses Grant. And I know right now it does seem like no matter what, the left is just anti-statue. So maybe they would tear this down too. I don't know. I don't feel like this is a this is my idea, and I think in a couple months people would be like, "Yeah, it's not a bad idea. I'll go with it." Right now, I don't think anyone would accept it. I have a feeling that people on the right, this isn't what they're talking about. A real strong feeling that my idea for replacing the statues just with more admirable people from that time period um, probably goes against what they what the whole point is. I'm sure they would not be happy. But in that same notion, I also don't think the left right now would be happy with that either, considering that they're tearing down statues that actually some of them were funded by slavers, or by slaves, I should say, and were eradicated and celebrated by former slaves. These statues of people who they admired. Those statues are coming down too. So yeah, right now maybe not a good look. But I'm curious what you guys think. Are you do you think it's a good idea to replace the statues with prominent people who were more, I would say, worth idolizing a little bit? I don't think anyone should be completely idolized, but people who should at least be should be honored. People who were on the right side of history. People like Thomas Garrett who went broke helping his fellow man. Um, or do you say no? No statues at all. They all got to come down. I want them gone. Or are you a person who thinks that we should just keep all the statues the way they are? There's nothing wrong with the situation. I'm kind of curious why you guys would feel that way about statues on any of those examples I gave. But and also one other thing, uh, the statues, if they should be in museums or not. I find that to be quite contentious with a lot of my fellow left-leaning people. So many of them disagree with me. They don't think they should be put in a museum at all. They should just be broken down and completely eviscerated. But I'm curious what a lot of you guys think.